Training camp is almost here. The Jets make some moves to get some players in and some moves to get some other players some more time. We'll break them all down today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Friday, July 19th, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from GangReedNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you'll get new episodes as soon as they're posted. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube and enjoyed the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Well, training camp is almost here for the New York Jets. Practices get underway next week, and the Jets made a few housekeeping moves over the last couple of days to get ready. Namely, maybe the biggest one is that they signed Malachi Corley, their third-round pick, who was the last unsigned rookie. Now, there were a few small rumblings that the Jets and Corley were having some difficulties negotiating the new deal. But as I mentioned on a recent show, it was very unlikely this was going to get to a point where Corley was holding out. I cannot think of a situation where there's ever been a third-round pick holding out. I mean, you're a third-round pick. You don't really have a lot of leverage. If you're a first-round pick, you're your team's prized draft pick. So you have a little bit of leverage because you want the team wants you in camp on time. If you're the top pick and you're not there on time, the team doesn't like that. You're the third round pick. I mean, look, the Jets loved Corley, obviously. I mean, they traded up for him. They spent much of the early part of day two reportedly trying to trade up for him. But you're your third round pick. Your contract's not very big. There really isn't that much to negotiate. When you're talking about like your first round pick, there are at least some things you can negotiate. There are things like offsets or the bonus schedule, and a few other things like that or at least things that can be negotiated. Should they ever be a driving force in a player not being in time for training camp? No, but these are things that can derail negotiations. I was always expecting Corley to be in camp on time. I thought it would have been the upset of the century if he was not in camp on time, and he is now signed. And that means the Jets get their entire draft class signed on time. And hey, good job, Jets. We finally did it. Jets have had an inordinate number of holdouts in the era of the rookie wage scale. And it goes back to the issues I talked about. Sometimes it's been offsets, sometimes it's been bonus schedule payments. It's happened under multiple GMs, which tells me the issue's always been ownership. And I always wondered, why don't the Jets, if the Jets have these issues getting their first round picks in on time, why don't they just negotiate these contracts a few months out and settle all the issues then? Well, this year, that's what the Jets did. So, hey, Jets are learning. Good job, Jets. Pleased with this. Pleased with having all of our rookies in camp on time. Also ahead of training camp, Jets placed a couple players on various unable to perform lists. The biggest name of those is Mike Williams, a wide receiver. Nick Bawden, and defensive tackle Leonard Taylor will begin training camp on the physically unable to perform list, which in all honesty is not a big deal. People kind of panic when they hear about a player beginning camp on the physically unable to perform list. But here's what it really means. It means the player is not healthy. The player is recovering from an injury and is not healthy enough to practice on day one. And the thing people don't realize when you hear about these physically unable to perform lists is a guy could suffer an injury on the first practice of the year, and he may have to miss practice time, and he won't be on the list. But if a player enters training camp and isn't ready to practice on day one, even if he's ready to practice on day two, he begins on the physically unable to perform list. And once he's ready to practice, he can go do the conditioning test, get himself, show that he's in shape, show that he's physically able to perform, and can step into the lineup. If Williams is ready to go day two of practice, they'll be able to activate him off the physically unable to perform list. Now, if a player remains on the PUP list until at the end of training camp, and once we're getting into the regular season, that's a different story. Then he has to sit out about a month and a half. He won't be a part of the active roster for a month and a half, but that's a long way off. And by all accounts, the Jets are expecting Mike Williams to be ready by week one. You have to remember, it's July 19th right now. Jet training camp begins next week. So it's the last week of July. First game of the season isn't until close to the middle of September, so there's a long way to go, and that's why I always say that you shouldn't get too panicked over injuries in the summer because players have a long time to recover. There's a long way to go, and really all that matters is getting them ready for week one. So Mike Williams begins training camp on the physically unable to perform list. Again, once he's ready to practice, he'll step in the lineup. And the Jets have given us every indication that they are expecting him to be in the lineup. In fact, Robert Saleh, a little while back, indicated the phrase he used was the Breece Hall schedule. You may remember last year, Breece Hall was not ready to practice on day one of training camp. But by the time the season came along, he ripped off a 28-yard run on his first carry. He was the Breece Hall of old. So, we don't really have bigger updates on the statuses of Nick Bawden and Leonard Taylor. Bawden's a fullback. No disrespect to fullbacks, but Bawden's not a key part of the offense by any stretch of the imagination. And then Taylor is a guy who really, let's be honest, competing for a roster spot, not a guy the Jets are expected to lean on very much this season. And then there were two other players who were added to a different list called the non-football injury list. They're the Jets, the quarterback the Jets drafted on day 3, Jordan Travis out of Florida State, and wide receiver Tyler Harrell. And it's essentially the same thing as the physically unable to perform list. It's just the reason these players are on the list is that their injuries are considered non-football injuries. And that's kind of weird because Travis's injury was definitely a football injury. He got injured on the football field last year, but it was a college. It was while he was playing in college, and for whatever reason, I don't know why they named the list this. They name it the non-football injury list. Maybe they should name it the non-NFL injury list. But an injury you suffer while a college player, if you're drafted, if you're not able to go day one of training camp practice, you still end up on the non-football injury list. And for Travis, I think we all know this is going to be a redshirt year anyway. I think the question is how quickly can he get back to the practice field, because the Jets are not going to count on him to play this year. If they're in the situation where he has to play, something's going wrong. Whenever you're down to your third quarterback, you're in trouble. As we have a recent example of that, the 2023 Jets, where they got down to quarterback 3 and even quarterback 4 once we got to the late point of last season. This year is about Travis hopefully getting some time on the bench, hopefully getting back to the practice field at some point. We don't know when that's going to be, and working on his game and working on developing, because as you probably know, Aaron Rodgers is the starting quarterback for the Jets, and Tyrod Taylor, the Jets went out and got the veteran Tyrod Taylor to back Rodgers up. There was no doubt the Jets were going to spend big on a veteran backup this offseason because, everything that happened last year when Zach Wilson, the inexperienced Zach Wilson, was Rodgers' backup and had to essentially, play the entire year until he was eventually benched. So the question with Travis is really, how quickly will he be ready? But I think, of the 5 players on the list, the one most of us are keeping our eyes on is Mike Williams, because we want to get him on the field at this point until the Jets. There's all these rumors about the Jets potentially making another trade for a top end receiver, but Williams is a key player for the Jets this year, because without Williams, you're back to kind of the receiving core you had last year, where you had an excellent player in Garrett Wilson, and then you had some questionable stuff behind him. So every reason to believe Mike Williams is going to be back in time for the start of the season, but until he is, all eyes will be on him, and hopefully he'll be ready to go week 1 when the Jets play the San Francisco 49ers. So that's us looking ahead. Ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we're going to take a look back. A couple of reports about a coach the Jets were interested in the offseason. He ended up going to a different team, and we'll discuss all of the dynamics behind that, why they tried to get this coach, what their inability to get him means. That's ahead here on this Friday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. And eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. And with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit. Only available to U.S. customers. This episode of Locked On Jets is also brought to you by LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals who are the right role for your team. And that's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. We're about to talk about a coach the Jets reached out to over the course of the offseason. They wanted to hire him. Maybe the Jets should use LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn isn't just a jobs board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else. even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not going to LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. And LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and may not have the time or resources to hire. So LinkedIn is constantly finding new ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. Big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We have new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Report came out this week from The Athletic, and I know a lot of Jets fans don't love The Athletic's coverage of the team, so I wasn't really going to discuss it, but the Jets apparently reached out to fired Falcons coach Arthur Smith for a job on their coaching staff. And then Pro Football Talk of NBC confirmed the report yesterday. And they mentioned that Smith's hesitancy to come to the Jets was due to his view that the role that the Jets had in mind for him was kind of undefined. Smith eventually signed on to be the Steelers' offensive coordinator. And I think if you know me, any chance I have to be critical of Nathaniel Hackett, I'm going to take it. Were the Jets right to reach out to Arthur Smith this offseason? I think that the Jets should have been looking for an upgrade on their offensive coaching staff. Nothing wrong with that. My biggest issue with the Jets right now, or one of my biggest issues, is the continued employment of Nathaniel Hackett, who has shown over and over and over again that he does not bring much to the table. And I think that the boom scenario for the New York Jets this year is that Aaron Rodgers renders Nathaniel Hackett irrelevant. Now, what can we say about this? Well, when you have a Hall of Fame quarterback, your coaching matters less than when you have a young, developing quarterback who's struggling like Zach Wilson was a year ago. In fact, I think the plan A for the Jets was for Hackett to not really matter that much last year. And I think the plan A for the Jets this year is for Hackett to not really matter that much. That said, I think last year showed you why you want a better offensive mind in the mix. Now, of course, Hackett is Rodgers' guy. And the reason for that is Hackett kind of lets Rodgers do whatever he wants. And as I mentioned, I think whenever you have a Hall of Fame quarterback, he's going to have control of the offense. That's just the way it works. And again, Hackett could be irrelevant. I think that's the hope for the Jets this year. But it just really frustrates me that he's still around, because there's really no reason for him to be around other than, being Aaron Rodgers' buddy. But when you think about some of the great quarterbacks in the league, like think about what they have in Kansas City. Yeah, they have the best quarterback in the NFL. They have a guy who's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer, a guy who, if he continues on the path he's on in Mahomes, he's a guy who we're going to talk about as one of the truly great quarterbacks who ever lived, a guy who's going to be in that discussion, in that pantheon. But his coach is not irrelevant. His coach adds something to the discussion. His coach makes him better. And that's like what I want. I get why Rodgers likes Hackett, because Hackett, goes with whatever he wants. But that's not always the best thing for you. It's not always the best thing if you're a student to have a teacher who just goes along with everything you want to do. It's always the best thing, when you're working, to have a boss who just does whatever you want to do. Sometimes it's good to be challenged. You may like it when it may be easier when you have an authority figure who doesn't challenge you, who just kind of goes along with the flow. But is it always the best thing for you? Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay did not always get along with Matt LaFleur, but I think LaFleur made it better. And there was compromise in that relationship, and there was always going to be compromise. And as long as Rodgers is the quarterback, it's always going to be the Aaron Rodgers offense. But does Nathaniel Hackett need to be on this team? And could the Jets have found a better coach who could add something to what Rodgers wants to do? Rodgers is so smart. He can dissect the defense, any way he wants. And the Jets will be fine. I think the Jets will be fine on offense as long as Rodgers is in there. But keeping Hackett around and just trying to bring in another name, it's almost like they did it for the sake of saying we did something to address the offense. It's almost like they said they did it for the sake of saying, we saw what happened last year, so now we're bringing in another coach. And I don't know if it's to be that effective. And the fact, the report that Arthur Smith was hesitant because the role wasn't really defined, that kind of tells me the Jets weren't that serious about, making an upgrade to the offensive coaching staff. And I think there are other areas that could have made upgrades to the offensive coaching staff that have nothing to do with the coordinator or Rodgers, namely getting rid of Keith Carter, who is the offensive line coach. I just think it's the type of thing that could have helped the team out. And I don't want to overstate it, because at the end of the day, it's a players' league. And because no matter who the Jets brought in, if they brought in somebody with good ideas who could help amplify what Rodgers can do, it still would be Aaron Rodgers' offense. And with a quarterback like Rodgers, once the play calls in, Rodgers is going to look at the defense, and he's going to be the one who decides what play they run. That's how it works. That's how it has to work in the NFL. With younger quarterbacks, that's tougher to do. And that's one of the reasons the Jets offense, I think, was nowhere near as effective with Zach Wilson last year. Obviously not the only reason, but I think that's part of the reason the Jets offense was nowhere near as effective with Zach Wilson last year as they will be with Aaron Rodgers, because Rodgers is so savvy that, he can adjust like one aspect of a receiver's route. If he sees something, it'd be some small tell in the defense, he'll be able to pick it up, and he doesn't need to change the play. He doesn't need to do a full audible. He can just change like one aspect of a receiver cutting up instead of down, instead of back, or receiver cutting left instead of right. He can change like one small thing, one subtle thing in the play call, and that'll probably take the play call from one that would have trouble working to one that has a very high odds of being successful. So I'm talking on the margins here. I'm not going to act like bringing Hackett back, if Rodgers is healthy, is going to be the thing that sinks the Jets. But it just seems so needless. I mean, it's just like it's almost to me like he's there to be Rodgers' friend. And I just don't like it. It just feels like the Jets are taking this offensive coordinator spot and squandering it, because you could have a guy in there who could add something to the discussion. And I think Arthur Smith probably saw this and he just thought, you know what, I'm not really going to have a say in this offense because Hackett's going to still be around. And and I'm not saying Arthur Smith's the greatest offensive mind ever. I mean, to be honest with you, he wouldn't have even been my first choice to bring in if we're talking about coaches who could bring something in to enhance the offense. But it just more speaks to me the way the Jets have handled Hackett, and maybe I'm giving it too much emphasis. Maybe I'm a little too frustrated by it just because I've been watching Hackett offenses. I've been watching Hackett offensive coordinators sabotage Jets offenses for 25 years now, because his father was the Jets offensive coordinator from 2001 through 2004, and it just drove me crazy. And now it's like I got to watch this son again, and it's the exact same stuff. They have the exact same complaints about how outdated the offense looks, about how we're not going to any of the modern trends. Not every son's exactly like his father, but in this case, the apple does not fall far from the tree. So anyway, if you did not enjoy it, thank you for listening to my rant about Hackett's, because the Hackett family has been torturing me for years, and I will continue to be frustrated by their presence on the Jets. And the best thing you can say, and this is the thing, is the best hope anybody has for Nathaniel Hackett is that Aaron Rodgers renders him irrelevant. It's quite a thing to say about your offensive coordinator. We hope he was not relevant. Anyway, I digress. And here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to a happier subject. Training camp's almost here. The practices get underway next week, and we'll talk about what that could mean for the Jets as we continue here on this Friday edition of Locked On Jets. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Comparison is the thief of joy, and it's easy to envy other people's lives. It may look like they have it all together on their Instagram, but in reality, they probably don't. Therapy can help you focus on what you want instead of what others have, so you can start living your best life. Therapy has many benefits. It's helpful for learning positive coping skills and how to set boundaries. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself, and it's not just for those who've experienced major trauma. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Friday. It's almost here. Training camp is almost underway for the New York Jets. The first practice of the year for the Jets is scheduled for July 25th. So that's this coming Thursday. We are less than 1 week from the Jets hitting the field. In fact, rookies have already reported. So, whatever extent that means training camp's begun. I guess training camp in some ways has begun, but the Jets don't hit the field until Thursday for practice. So an exciting season of Jets football could be underway. What are we looking for in training camp? Well, the first thing you look at is the conditioning test. And that's the team set up this. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's a conditioning test. And sometimes it's, you run the field, I don't know, 6 times or something like that. It's a very grueling process, no matter what it is. Some teams incorporate other drills into it. Essentially, it just shows you're in great shape. And the NFL is now a league where players are players are working out 12 months. I mean, it's unbelievable the condition these guys are in. In some ways, the length of training camp, it's a very long process. It's a relic of the past when players came in and maybe they didn't work as hard during the offseason as they do now, and players kind of worked their way into shape. It was a camp to train back in those days. Now everybody's going to pass the conditioning test. If you don't pass the conditioning test, something's wrong. It means you weren't prepared for the season. So that's the first thing to watch. Just make sure everybody passes the conditioning test. And conditioning test is, again, most players are going to be able to pass it with ease. It's really more a question for guys coming back from injuries, guys who are on the physically unable to perform list, as I mentioned. They have to do that to show that they're ready. They have to show that they're able to go, and that's what gets them going. So that'll be one of the first things you hear. Outside of that, I just gave you the reason that the length of training camp right now maybe is a relic of the past. I think one area where it still makes sense to have a long training camp is the Jets will start installing their offense and their defense. And there are a lot of new faces on the offensive side of the ball this year. Mike Williams, I would love to get him back as soon as possible. They put in all their plays. They spend the training camp putting in all their plays. And what's significant about this, and it's not something any of us ever appreciate in season, but you essentially spend training camp practicing your plays. This is how this play runs. This is how that play runs. Once you get to the start of the regular season, teams kind of put away their playbook, and they have what's known as a game plan each week. And that's of, the thousands of plays in their playbook. There might be something like 30, 40, 50, 60, which they have ready to go, which they kind of work on to prepare for their next opponent, because you can't have like 1,000 plays ready for an opponent. You have to, there's only a couple days to prepare for a game. So you have to kind of select the plays that you think are going to work best against that particular opponent. And that week, when you install the game plan, you might be practicing for them for the first time since training camp. So that's why these training camp practices matter. So you're working on all your plays, and you may practice something now that you won't see again until December. So it's important to get it down. It's important to get it into good shape. And then the other aspect of this is, again, with the new faces, just making sure Aaron Rodgers developing chemistry with the new receivers on this team. You could look at guys like the third round pick Malachi Corley, Williams, once he gets back on the field, and then reigniting the chemistry he had last year with guys he was working well with in training camp, namely Garrett Wilson. I mean, one of the things that was talked about most about Jets training camp in 2023 was that it felt like Rodgers and Wilson were really connecting in a big way. And unfortunately, Rodgers's injury, took that away. So now after, close to, 10, 11 months, those two just need to work back to get it back. And I don't imagine it's going to be that difficult. I think chemistry doesn't go away between a quarterback and a receiver. In fact, over time, it only gets better. And even after a long layoff, I would imagine the two of them will pick right where they left off. So these will be some of the key things to watch in training camp. And we can finally stop talking about all this, all these stories that aren't really stories in the offseason. No more talk about, at least until there's something concrete. We don't have to talk about Jets, making some blockbuster trade, or we don't have to speculate about it. We won't, if once the Jets are actually talking with another team about a potential blockbuster trade, we can talk about it, but we don't have to hear this made up stuff where people are just trying to generate content or trying to generate an angle. We'll actually have some football to talk about as training camp gets underway next week for the New York Jets. But for this week, that's all. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your weekend, everybody. We'll be back next week to talk more Jets.